The Quapaw, known traditionally as the Ogáxpa or Downstream People, belong to the Dhegiha Siouan language group. Tracing their origins requires navigating the complex timelines of pre-contact North America. Glottochronological studies indicate that the Dhegiha peoples separated into distinct entities in a period ranging between A.D. 950 and 1513. The historical consensus situates their ancestral homeland in the lower Ohio River Valley. From there, the tribes initiated a massive westward migration. According to Quapaw oral tradition, this migration met a critical juncture at the banks of the Mississippi River. As the people attempted to cross, a dense, blinding fog enveloped the waters. To navigate the treacherous current, the people braided a massive rope of wild grapevines. However, mid-crossing, the vine snapped. The groups that had already crossed successfully continued their journey upstream, eventually becoming the Omaha, Ponca, Osage, and Quapaw Nations. The group left stranded on the river, swept away by the southward current, embraced their fate and named themselves Ogáxpa, those who drifted downstream. Settling near the confluence of the Arkansas and Mississippi rivers, the Quapaw developed a highly sophisticated society by the mid-17th century. Their civilization was structured around permanent villages and a complex kinship system divided into two primary moieties, earth and sky. The tribe was further subdivided into 21 distinct clans named after animals, heavenly bodies, or natural phenomena such as thunder. Uniquely among many southern tribes, the Quapaw were strictly patrilineal, tracing descent through the father's line, and patrilical, meaning wives relocated to live with their husbands' families. Each village was meticulously organized, ensuring that sky clans were positioned on the opposite side of a sacred circle from earth clans, reflecting a profound cosmological balance. The Quapaw were master agriculturists, cultivating vast fields of corn, beans, squash, pumpkins, gourds, and tobacco, while supplementing their diets through seasonal hunting of deer, bear, and buffalo. This agricultural and societal stability positioned them as the dominant force in the region long before European sails appeared on the horizon. The introduction of European powers to the Quapaw territory initiated a complex era of colonial diplomacy. The first recorded European contact occurred in 1541 when the Spanish explorer Hernando de Soto encountered the indigenous populations of the region. However, sustained contact did not begin until 1673, with the arrival of French explorers Father Jacques Marquette and Louis Joliet. The French learned of the Quapaw through the Alini Indians, who referred to the southern tribe as the Arkansas, an Alini word translating to people of the south wind. This exonym would eventually become the namesake of the Arkansas River and the surrounding territory. In 1682, the French explorer René Robert Cavelier, Sieur de La Salle, formally negotiated a peace treaty with the Quapaw, claiming the territory for France while noting the tribe's uniform kindness and strategic hospitality. Unlike the violent subjugation characterizing much of European colonization, the Quapaw fostered a mutually beneficial, deeply integrated alliance with the French. In 1686, at the explicit request of the Quapaw, French commander Henri de Tonty constructed a trading post near the mouth of the Arkansas River. Known as the Arkansas Post, this was the very first European settlement established along the Mississippi River. The Quapaw were not passive subjects. They were formidable geopolitical actors. They supplied the French with agricultural goods, specifically corn cultivated by Quapaw women, and horses raised by both genders. They actively intermarried with French colonists, cementing familial ties that strengthened their diplomatic bonds. Militarily, the Quapaw were staunch allies, defending the Mississippi River against the pro-British Chickasaw and aligning with the French colonists against the Natchez during the Natchez Revolt of 1729. Even after France ceded the Louisiana colony to Spain in 1762 following the 7 Years' War, the Quapaw maintained their diplomatic sovereignty, swiftly becoming vital allies to the new Spanish colonial government. The French influence left an indelible linguistic and cultural mark on the region. French Catholic priests, including Father Marquette and Father Nicolas Foucault, introduced Catholicism to the tribe, a faith that would later interlace with native traditions. Furthermore, European struggles with French terminology birthed modern geographic names. For example, the French settlement Le Petit Rocher was translated by later Americans to Little Rock, and the French road chemin couvert, covered way, was mispronounced by Anglo-Americans as Smackover. The territorial acquisition by the United States initiated a swift, legalized and devastating campaign of indigenous dispossession. By 1811, white settlers in the territory outnumbered the Quapaw by a ratio of 2 to 1. Operating under the legal doctrine of plenary authority, which effectively granted the federal government absolute, unchecked power over native nations, the U.S. government forced the Quapaw into a series of highly detrimental land cession treaties. The Treaty of 1818. Under immense federal pressure, the Quapaw were coerced into ceding approximately 32 million acres of ancestral land spanning present-day Arkansas, Louisiana, Mississippi, and Oklahoma. In exchange for a meager $4,000 in goods and a $1,000 annual annuity, the tribe was restricted to a vastly smaller 1 million-acre reservation between the Arkansas and Ouachita rivers in central Arkansas. The Treaty of 1824, American expansionist appetite quickly consumed the remaining reservation. Just 6 years later, the Quapaw were forced to cede their remaining million acres and were mandated to remove to the Caddo Reservation along the Red River in Louisiana. The Treaty of 1833, the final treaty, mandated the complete removal of the Quapaw to Indian Territory in the northeastern corner of Oklahoma. The 1824 relocation to Louisiana is remembered as the Quapaw Trail of Tears. The journey and subsequent settlement were apocalyptic. The Quapaw were forced to integrate with the Caddo tribe, a group with whom they were historically hostile. The environment was entirely inhospitable. Successive catastrophic flooding destroyed their agricultural crops, leading to widespread famine. Combined with rampant disease, approximately 1/3 of the Quapaw population perished on the Red River, including the family of the legendary Quapaw leader, Chief Saracen. Faced with total annihilation, many Quapaw leaders concluded that death in their ancestral homelands was preferable to starvation and exile. Destitute and desperate, hundreds of Quapaw defied the federal government and walked back to the familiar hunting grounds of Arkansas. However, the U.S. government refused to allow their return. The 1833 treaty forced the survivors northward into Indian Territory, Oklahoma. Compounding the tragedy, federal surveyors made an egregious error, placing the newly relocated Quapaw on land that legally belonged to the Seneca-Cayuga tribe. This error forced further displacement, scattering the already fractured tribe, with some members fleeing as far as Kansas in a desperate bid to live traditionally, away from the draconian oversight of federal Indian agents. To fully comprehend the legal mechanisms utilized to subjugate the Quapaw, one must examine the broader systemic assault on the Dhegiha Siouan peoples. While the Quapaw were struggling to survive in Indian Territory, their linguistic cousins, the Ponca, who had traveled upstream centuries prior, faced an equally horrific forced removal. By the mid-19th century, the Ponca had settled along the Niobrara River in present-day Nebraska, subsisting on horticulture and bison hunting. Despite never warring with the United States and signing treaties in 1858 and 1865 that guaranteed them a 96,000-acre reservation, the Ponca fell victim to an egregious administrative blunder. In the 1868 Treaty of Fort Laramie, the federal government accidentally included the entirety of the Ponca Reservation within the boundaries of the newly designated Great Sioux Reservation. Rather than admit their mistake and renegotiate with the Sioux, the U.S. government chose to forcefully evict the Ponca. In 1877, under military escort, the Ponca were forced on a 55-day, 280-mile death march to the same desolate Indian Territory where the Quapaw had been exiled. The trek was brutal, characterized by freezing spring rains, floods, and exhaustion. Nearly a third of the tribe perished. Among the tragic losses was an 18-month-old girl named White Buffalo Girl, who died of pneumonia and was buried in Neligh, Nebraska, where the townspeople promised her grieving father they would care for her grave, a promise kept to this day. Shortly after arriving in Oklahoma, Bear Shield, the teenage son of Ponca chief Standing Bear, succumbed to the harsh conditions. Refusing to bury his son in a strange land where his spirit would wander, Standing Bear, accompanied by 65 followers, defied federal law and began a 500-mile winter trek back to Nebraska to bury Bear Shield's bones in traditional Ponca territory. Upon reaching the Omaha Reservation in Nebraska, Standing Bear and his band were arrested by General George Crook under orders from the Secretary of the Interior. However, Crook, deeply sympathetic to the Ponca's plight, delayed their return to Oklahoma and enlisted the help of Thomas Henry Tibbles, an editor for the Omaha Daily Herald. Tibbles secured two prominent attorneys, John L. Webster and A.J. Poppleton, who filed a writ of habeas corpus on Standing Bear's behalf. The resulting 1879 trial, Standing Bear versus Crook, was a watershed moment in American jurisprudence. The U.S. government argued that Native Americans were neither citizens nor persons under the law, and therefore had no right to sue for their freedom. Standing Bear, speaking through an interpreter, delivered an impassioned plea to the court, extending his hand and declaring, "That hand is not the color of yours, but if I pierce it, I shall feel pain. I am a man." On May 12, 1879, Judge Elmer S. Dundy issued a landmark ruling. An Indian is a person, within the meaning of the laws of the United States, entitled to the protections of the 14th Amendment and the right of habeas corpus. While this did not grant immediate full citizenship, which occurred in 1924, it established the critical legal precedent that Native Americans could fight the federal government in its own courts. The Ponca struggles continued well into the 20th century. The northern Ponca were disastrously terminated by the U.S. government in 1962, losing their tribal status and lands, until activist Fred Leroy successfully fought for the Ponca Restoration Act in 1990. The legal frameworks established by the Ponca would eventually empower all tribes, including the Quapaw, to assert their modern sovereignty. The socio-economic trajectory of the Quapaw Nation was radically altered in the early 20th century by the discovery of massive lead and zinc deposits beneath their reservation in northeastern Oklahoma. This geographic area became the epicenter of the Tri-State Mining District, encompassing parts of Oklahoma, Kansas, and Missouri. During the global conflicts of World War I and World War II, the region was vital to the United States military-industrial complex, producing over 75% of the bullets and shells utilized by American armed forces. However, the economic windfall generated by this extraction overwhelmingly bypassed the Quapaw people, instead enriching outside mining conglomerates. When the ore was depleted and the mining companies abandoned the region, they left the Quapaw with an apocalyptic environmental legacy. The landscape was scarred by approximately 30 million tons of toxic mine tailings, locally known as chat. These massive piles of heavy metal-laced gravel towered up to 200 feet high, dominating the horizon. The environmental and public health impacts were catastrophic. High winds routinely carried lead-contaminated dust from the chat piles, blanketing Quapaw residential areas. Rainfall caused toxic water to leach from the tailings, turning the local surface water, specifically Tar Creek, into a neon-orange, highly acidic hazard that poisoned the local aquifer and decimated local ecology. In 1980, the EPA identified the region's surface water as some of the most toxic in the country. Consequently, in 1983, the EPA designated a 40-square-mile area, encompassing nearly all of the Quapaw Nation's land, as the Tar Creek Superfund site, placing it on the national priority list for cleanup. Despite numerous studies demonstrating severe detrimental health impacts on the local indigenous population, federal remediation efforts languished for decades. Bureaucratic inefficiency and poorly incentivized federal contractors often exacerbated the problem. Contractors paid by the pound frequently scraped away healthy, vital topsoil along with the chat, rendering the land barren and agriculturally useless. This period represented a textbook case of environmental racism, where a historically marginalized indigenous community was disproportionately exposed to hazardous industrial waste, while the government's response remained agonizingly slow. Frustrated by decades of slow, ineffective, and occasionally destructive federal cleanup efforts, the Quapaw Nation sought a radical new approach to environmental sovereignty. Drawing upon the legal fortitude established by their ancestors and utilizing the Comprehensive Environmental Response, Compensation and Liability Act, CER-CLA, the Quapaw initiated a historic shift in Superfund management. In 2013, the Quapaw Nation negotiated a groundbreaking agreement with the EPA to take over the remediation of a 40-acre parcel within the Tar Creek site. This specific parcel, known as the Catholic 40, held deep cultural significance, as it was the historical site of a religious boarding school for Quapaw children. This agreement marked a monumental precedent. It was the first time in United States history that a Native American tribe led the remedial operations of a federal Superfund site. The Quapaw approach to remediation was vastly superior to previous federal contractor efforts. Utilizing their own heavy equipment, engineers, and environmental scientists, the Quapaw Nation excavated, hauled, and safely disposed of over 107,000 tons of chat from the Catholic 40 in less than a year, finishing ahead of schedule. The larger, cleaner stone was sold for roadwork, where the lead was safely encapsulated within asphalt, while the contaminated remainder was deposited into safely encased repositories. Following this success, the Quapaw Nation Environmental Office, QNEO, massively scaled their operations. Over the next decade, Quapaw environmental remediation specialists oversaw the removal of more than 7 million tons of mine waste and successfully remediated over 600 acres of highly contaminated land. The tribe employed advanced, ecologically sound techniques, such as introducing in-situ soil amendments that bind heavy metals, utilizing mushroom compost to restore soil vitality, and planting thousands of native seeds to reconstruct natural wetlands. This environmental reclamation has catalyzed a profound economic revitalization. The restored acreage has been returned to productive agricultural use, generating revenue through row crops like corn and soybeans. Furthermore, the Quapaw have established a robust food sovereignty division. The remediated land now supports greenhouses cultivating traditional medicines and vegetables, as well as a large herd of bison. To process this livestock, the Quapaw opened the first tribally owned meat processing plant, ensuring a steady, sovereign supply of protein and economic independence. Parallel to the physical healing of the land is the profound cultural and spiritual healing of the Quapaw people. A central pillar of this renaissance is the revitalization of traditional Quapaw pottery. Historically, during the Mississippian culture period, 900 AD to 1450 AD, and into the 16th century, Quapaw artisans, specifically women, were renowned for their fine craftsmanship. Their work, often classified by archaeologists as Avenue polychrome, was highly distinct in North America, featuring intricate red, white, and black swirling motifs interpreted as representations of the sun, moon, and stars. Furthermore, they were famous for crafting complex effigy forms depicting animals such as dogs, deer, otters, frogs, and even human figures. These vessels were highly prized in expansive trade networks, noted by early French explorers as prime examples of indigenous trade goods. However, the trauma of forced removals, the scattering of the tribe, and aggressive federal assimilation policies nearly extinguished this art form entirely. In recent years, the tradition has been brought back from the brink of oblivion by dedicated tribal artisans like Dhegiha, whose Quapaw name is Dhegiha, Little Buffalo Woman. Serving as a cultural educator, Dhegiha has spent over a decade researching and replicating the authentic techniques of her ancestors. She utilizes the exact same traditional tools her ancestors used: bear claws, deer antlers, sticks, bones, feathers, and river mussel shells to shape the clay. In her instructional classes for tribal members, Dhegiha mandates that each student create 2 pots, one for personal connection and a second to be gifted for traditional Quapaw funerals, ensuring that ancient funerary customs are actively sustained. This revival is not merely an artistic endeavor, it is a profound act of resilience, storytelling, and cultural restoration. Parallel to the physical healing of the land is the profound cultural and spiritual healing of the Quapaw people. A central pillar of this renaissance is the revitalization of traditional Quapaw pottery. Historically, during the Mississippian culture period, 900 AD to 1450 AD, and into the 16th century, Quapaw artisans, specifically women, were renowned for their fine craftsmanship. Their work, often classified by archaeologists as Avenue polychrome, was highly distinct in North America, featuring intricate red, white, and black swirling motifs interpreted as representations of the sun, moon, and stars. Furthermore, they were famous for crafting complex effigy forms depicting animals such as dogs, deer, otters, frogs, and even human figures. These vessels were highly prized in expansive trade networks, noted by early French explorers as prime examples of indigenous trade goods. However, the trauma of forced removals, the scattering of the tribe, and aggressive federal assimilation policies nearly extinguished this art form entirely. In recent years, the tradition has been brought back from the brink of oblivion by dedicated tribal artisans like Dhegiha, whose Quapaw name is Dhegiha, Little Buffalo Woman. Serving as a cultural educator, Dhegiha has spent over a decade researching and replicating the authentic techniques of her ancestors. She utilizes the exact same traditional tools her ancestors used: bear claws, deer antlers, sticks, bones, feathers, and river mussel shells to shape the clay. In her instructional classes for tribal members, Dhegiha mandates that each student create 2 pots, one for personal connection and a second to be gifted for traditional Quapaw funerals, ensuring that ancient funerary customs are actively sustained. This revival is not merely an artistic endeavor, it is a profound act of resilience, storytelling, and cultural restoration. The historical trajectory of the Quapaw Nation represents one of the most profound studies in indigenous resilience and adaptation in North American history. From the ideological snapping of the grapevine that sent them downstream, Through the brutal, legalized ethnic cleansing of the 19th century treaties and into the apocalyptic environmental devastation of the 20th century, the Quapaw have continually adapted in order to survive. Their history is inextricably linked to the broader legal and existential struggles of the Dhegiha Siouan diaspora, most notably illuminated by the Ponca tribe's successful fight for legal personhood in 1879. Today, the Quapaw stand as national pioneers of environmental justice and tribal sovereignty. By legally reclaiming the remediation of the Tar Creek Superfund site and physically restoring the poisoned earth to agricultural productivity, they have redefined what modern sovereignty means. True autonomy for the Quapaw relies not merely on federal recognition, but on the tangible power to physically heal, steward, and culturally resurrect their sovereign lands and traditions.